The rain wouldn't stop. It beat against the window of the cramped third-floor apartment, like it had a score to settle. Jack Turner sat at the chipped kitchen table, shoulders slumped forward, staring into the black coffee he couldn't afford to sweeten. The kitchen smelled faintly of motor oil and burnt toast. A single overhead bulb buzzed. Across the table, Ben sat cross-legged on a wobbly chair, sketching something in his tattered notebook. The rain had started last night and hadn't let up. Jack figured it was the universe's way of echoing his insides gray cold and just about to overflow. His wallet lay open on the table. Inside exactly $50, 5 tens, neatly flattened like that made them worth more. Next to it sat a small velvet box. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He could see the image in his mind clearly, Sarah's wedding ring tucked inside like a frozen memory. It was the last valuable thing he owned, and he'd rather lose a limb than part with it. Ben didn't say much these days. He was only 9, but some part of him had grown up too fast in the 18 months since cancer hollowed Sarah into nothing. Jack saw it in the way Ben tried not to ask for things anymore, the way he never complained about dinner when it was just plain rice and a fried egg, the way he tried to smile for Jack's sake, not his own. But today, Ben had let something slip. "Jason and the other guys are going camping this weekend," he'd said casually, like it didn't matter. His eyes never left his notebook. Jack's heart twisted. He couldn't afford gas to drive to a campground, let alone the gear. Ben knew that. That was why he hadn't asked. And that hurt worse than if he had. Jack looked at his son's drawing. It was a house again. Big yard, tree swing, a wide porch. There were sunflowers in front of the windows. That's how you knew it was a dream. They couldn't even afford the plastic kind. "What you building there?" Jack tried, voice low. Ben shrugged. "Just thinking." Jack nodded. He looked back down at the money, at the ring box. A knock came at the door. Loud, sharp. Jack flinched. Landlord. Right on schedule. Jack opened the door just enough to see the heavy-set man standing in the hallway, holding a clipboard like a threat. "Rent was due last week," he said flatly. "I know," Jack muttered. "Give me 3 days." The landlord didn't argue. He just walked away. 3 days. Jack didn't even know if they'd make it to morning. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. The radiator hissed like it was angry at them for being poor. Ben had curled up under 2 thin blankets, shivering. Jack lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Sarah's voice echoing in his head. "Just take care of him, Jack. No matter what." He got up, poured a glass of water, sat back at the kitchen table. Then out of habit, he pulled out his phone and opened the local classifieds. Most listings were junk, used furniture, missing dogs, worn-out lawnmowers. But one post caught his eye under the county government notices section. Property tax auction. This Saturday. Seized properties to be sold as is. Minimum bid per parcel varies by location. He almost scrolled past it, but something made him click. Parcel 27, 1.8 acres, single dwelling, uninhabitable, Sevier County. Opening bid, $50. Jack blinked. 50. The exact amount in his wallet. He opened the attached photo. The cabin looked like a corpse, windows missing, roof, sagging wood, grayed from years of neglect. But there were trees around it. Space. Silence. And even if it collapsed the moment he touched it, it would still be his. He leaned back, heart thumping. This was stupid. Insane. The rent was due. Ben needed food. But he looked at the couch where his son was curled up, dreaming of houses they'd never own. And in that moment, something shifted. The next day, Jack picked Ben up from school. The boy threw his backpack in the back seat, climbed into the passenger side of the battered pickup, and buckled in. Jack didn't drive home. Instead, he pulled into the gravel lot of a pawn shop he hadn't stepped inside since before Sarah got sick. "Wait here," Jack said. Ben watched silently as his dad stepped out, jacket pulled tight against the cold. Jack's boots splashed in a muddy puddle as he walked to the door, opened it, and disappeared inside. The pawn shop smelled like sweat metal and desperation. Jack placed the velvet box on the counter. The clerk opened it and let out a low whistle. "Nice piece." Sentimental, Jack didn't answer. The clerk named a price. It was fair. Jack nodded once. 5 minutes later, he walked out with $100 in cash. Ben didn't ask. Back home, Jack placed the money on the table beside the listing he'd printed out. Ben climbed onto the chair opposite him, chewing on a pencil. "You think it's real?" Ben asked softly, eyes flicking between the paper and his dad. "Only one way to find out." Ben started sketching again. This time the cabin had curtains in the windows. A chimney puffed smoke into the sky. There was a swing hanging from an oak tree and a dog sleeping on the porch. Jack leaned back in his chair and watched him for a moment. Then he said the words he'd been holding in all day. "It's not just money I'm running out of, Ben. It's hope." Ben didn't look up, but his hand paused. Then he kept drawing. Jack stared out the window. The rain had stopped. The clouds were parting. And somewhere up in those mountains, a forgotten cabin was waiting. He didn't know what they'd find. Maybe nothing. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something shift. A crack of light in the dark. The room buzzed with quiet tension, not the kind you feel during a funeral or a fight, but the kind that clung to the air when people were about to bet money they couldn't afford to lose. Jack Turner stood at the back of the municipal building's old community room, holding a folded piece of paper in one hand and a bidder number in the other. His palms were slick. The room smelled like stale coffee, old paperwork, and linoleum. Rows of people sat in metal chairs, murmuring softly, flipping through the auction packet. Most wore business casual or denim, and boots. Some were flippers, others were retirees looking for cheap land. A few looked like they'd made a life out of chasing desperate deals. Jack didn't fit in. His coat was worn at the sleeves, his jeans had motor oil stains that hadn't washed out in years, and the soles of his boots had started to separate near the toes. But in his pocket, tucked safely next to his chest, was a folded receipt from the pawn shop and 10 crisp $10 bills. The money from Sarah's ring. The only reason he was standing here. The auctioneer, a balding man in a brown blazer who looked like he'd rather be fishing, tapped the mic, signaling the start. "All right, folks. Welcome to the Sevier County Property Tax Auction. All properties sold as is. No refunds, no backsize. Cash or certified check due by close of business today." Jack swallowed hard. This was it. The auction began. Lot after lot went by numbers, coordinates, prices flying past his ears like bullets. Some parcels started at $500, others at $5,000. Most climbed quickly as hands shot into the air. Jack's stomach turned. His fingers clenched tighter around his bidder number. Finally, the auctioneer shuffled his papers and called out, "Parcel 27. Cabin structure on 1.8 acres uninhabitable. Opening bid $50. Jack's heart kicked. He raised his number. The auctioneer looked around the room. Silence. 50, we have. 50, he called. Do I hear 75? A man in the third row, khakis pressed button down, probably a weekend renovator, casually raised his card. Jack's throat went dry. He hesitated. Then slowly, his hand went to his chest, pressing against the shape of the ring receipt in his pocket. That pain, that loss had already cost him everything. What was one more blow, he stood straighter. 100. Jack said louder than he meant to. A few people turned. A woman in the back raised an eyebrow. The auctioneer blinked, surprised by the jump. $100, he repeated. Any advance, silence. The man in khakis paused, tilted his head, then shook it. Sold, the gavel rang. Jack exhaled so hard it came out like a groan. For a moment, the room spun. He sat down slowly, head bowed, heart pounding in his ears. It wasn't just a win. It was salvation. Jack drove straight to Ben's school after the paperwork was signed. He didn't even turn off the engine when his son climbed in. "Where are we going?" Ben asked, confused, as the truck headed away from town. Jack just smiled. "On an adventure." They drove east into the hills. Knoxville faded into rolling trees and weather-worn fences. The land shifted, flatter roads gave way to switchbacks and gravel paths. The Smoky Mountains rose like ghosts through the haze ahead. Ben leaned forward, face glued to the window. "This is far." Jack glanced over. "You scared, no?" Ben said, his voice quiet but certain. "It feels like something good is out here." Jack's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. They turned off onto a cracked road that eventually gave up trying to be paved. Weeds brushed the sides of the truck, and low-hanging branches scraped the top like fingernails on metal. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. No cell towers, no engine noise except their own. When they crested the final hill, Jack hit the brakes. The cabin stood in a shallow clearing, weathered and skeletal. The porch leaned like a drunk. Vines crawled up the chimney. The roof was missing shingles, the windows long shattered. Nature had claimed it, but not destroyed it. Ben got out of the truck and stood still, staring. Jack expected disappointment. Instead, Ben said softly, "It's perfect." Jack looked at him in disbelief. "It just needs some help," Ben added, stepping forward like he was walking into a memory that hadn't been made yet. Jack followed, heart full and heavy. They stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning beneath their weight. Jack fished out the rusted brass key the auction clerk had handed him, slid it into the lock, and turned. The door creaked open. Dust rolled out like breath. Inside, the air was thick with age. Cobwebs hung like lace. The fireplace was choked with ash and leaves, but the bones where strong timber still held its frame. In the corner, a staircase spiraled to a small loft overhead. Ben walked through it slowly, wide-eyed. Jack ran his hand along a beam. Solid. "It's bigger than the apartment," Ben said, climbing the stairs. Jack smiled for the first time in weeks. They spent the next few hours walking the property. There was a spring down the slope, burbling through moss-covered stones. Trees wrapped the land like arms. The sun slipped low, pouring gold across the clearing. Jack sat on the porch as Ben kicked leaves in the yard. Then he heard a car door. He stood. A beat-up blue pickup pulled into the clearing. The driver climbed out, flannel shirt, tool belt, and a grin that could slice steel. "Tucker Davis," the man called, extending a hand. Jack stared. "You're kidding." "Was checking the listings yesterday," Tucker said. "Saw your name on Parcel 27. Figured it had to be you." "Damn, Jack. What have you gotten yourself into?" Jack chuckled, shaking his friend's hand. "I don't even know." Tucker looked at the cabin, whistled low. She's ugly. She's ours. Tucker nodded. You know I still work carpentry, right? You need help. Jack clapped him on the shoulder. I'll need all the help I can get. Ben ran up, panting. Who's this? This, Jack said, is a very old friend. Ben grinned. We're building a dream house. Tucker looked at the boy, then at Jack. You serious about this? Jack looked at the cabin, the clearing, the ring he no longer had, and the boy who had never stopped believing. Sometimes you have to give up what you love to protect who you love. He turned back to Tucker. I've never been more serious. That night, Jack and Ben unrolled sleeping bags in the loft, the wind whispering through cracks in the wall. They didn't have power or plumbing or even a stove, but they had something else, a beginning. Ben held his sketchbook under the moonlight, scribbling something. Jack leaned over. What are you drawing now? Ben smiled. Secret rooms, Jack laughed. We don't even have working doors. Not yet, Ben said. And somewhere beneath the floorboards, unseen and untouched for decades, something shifted. A loose plank rattled slightly. Waiting. The morning sun broke through the trees in streaks of gold, scattering across the worn wood floor of the cabin, like light filtering through stained glass. Jack woke to the sound of birdsong and rustling leaves. He blinked at the ceiling, the boards above his head uneven, patched with old nails and the smell of cedar. But something about waking up here felt different. Not better, not yet. But different. He turned his head. Ben was still asleep beside him, curled in a sleeping bag, hugging his sketchbook like it was armor. Jack smiled and let himself be still for a few seconds, listening to the quiet. Not the silence of their apartment in Knoxville, which always felt cold and compressed. This was open, alive. It made him uneasy and hopeful at the same time. Downstairs, Jack brewed coffee over a portable stove they'd borrowed from Tucker. He sat on the front step of the porch, sipping from a tin mug, looking out at the tangle of green and brush that would someday be a yard. Tucker was supposed to arrive around noon to help clean out the cabin's interior. Jack figured they had weeks, maybe months of work ahead of them. But strangely, he didn't mind. For the first time in years, work felt like movement, a way forward. Ben finally came stumbling down the stairs, his hair sticking up and his shirt half tucked. He yawned as he stepped outside, blinking at the light. Jack handed him a cup of hot cocoa. Sleep okay? Ben nodded, sipping. I dreamed the house had a secret door behind the fireplace. Jack smirked. That'd be something, huh? Ben gave him a sleepy grin and pulled out his sketchbook, already flipping to a blank page. Later, while Tucker worked outside repairing the porch beam, Jack and Ben began sweeping out the main room. Dust clouds rose with every step. Old boards groaned under their weight, and the musty scent of mildew hung in the air, like the breath of the building itself. Jack pried open some old cabinets. Just mice droppings, rotted papers, and empty jars. Nothing useful. He moved on to the fireplace, large, bricked in, its stones chipped and dark from decades of smoke. Ben crouched nearby, brushing cobwebs from the shelf above the hearth. Hey, Dad, Ben said suddenly, standing on his tiptoes. There's something weird back here. Jack walked over, where Ben tapped a board at the back of the built-in shelf. It's loose. Jack knelt, ran his fingers along the edges. Sure enough, one section of the wood paneling wobbled slightly. He gripped the sides and gave it a tug. With a low creak, the board popped out, revealing a shallow cavity filled with paper, dozens of pages, yellowed and brittle with age. Jack pulled them out gently. They were tied together with a faded red ribbon. He unfolded the first page. Ben leaned over his shoulder, wide-eyed. "What is it?" Jack stared at the handwriting, tight, precise, slanted slightly to the right. April 4th, 1982. The machine stabilized today. It held resonance for 13.7 seconds before overheating. It's progress. They'll come looking soon, I feel it in my bones. But I'm not ready to hand this over. Not yet. Not until I'm sure it won't be used to destroy instead of heal. WG. Jack read it again, slower. Then flipped to the next page. There were more entries. Some were just numbers notes on energy conversions and field resistance. Others read like thoughts scrawled during restless nights, fears of agents at the door, mentions of oscillation bursts and harmonic containment, and above all, the same name signed at the bottom of every one, Walter Granger. Ben looked up. Who was he? "I don't know," Jack muttered. "But this place used to be his. Must have been decades ago." Ben sat down cross-legged, picking up one of the looser pages. He was building something, right? A machine. Jack nodded slowly. "Looks like it." He glanced toward the window. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. A shadow passed across the clearing, but when Jack turned, it was gone. Something itched at the base of his skull. A sensation he hadn't felt since Sarah was sick, when everything looked fine on the surface, but something deep down told him the ground was about to give way. "Let's keep this quiet," he said to Ben. "Just for now." Ben nodded solemnly. He'd learned early not to ask questions he didn't need answers to yet. By mid-afternoon, the cabin looked a little less like a ruin and more like a skeleton waiting for muscle. They'd cleared the main room, swept upstairs, patched a few holes in the walls. Tucker installed a makeshift latch on the front door. "You boys making history in there," Tucker joked, stepping inside with a toolbox. Jack handed him the journal pages without a word. Tucker read silently for a minute, eyebrows rising. "Well, damn," he muttered. "This guy wasn't just a recluse. He was smart. Probably paranoid, too." Jack nodded. "Feels bigger than just a backwoods inventor, though. Look at the way he writes, like someone was after him." Tucker scratched his beard. "Could be. We're not far from Oak Ridge out here. Lot of weird government science history in these mountains." Jack hadn't thought of that. Oak Ridge, home of the Manhattan Project. It wasn't that far, just a couple of counties over. Ben looked up from the floor. So he was hiding. Jack met Tucker's eyes. Maybe. Or protecting something. As the sun dropped behind the trees, they sat outside around a fire pit Jack had hastily assembled from old stones. The journal sat between them on a stump, its pages rustling in the breeze. Ben flipped to a drawing tucked between the entries. It was a rough sketch, lines and circles intersecting with handwritten notes crammed into every corner. Jack couldn't make sense of it, but the words harmonic energy convergence appeared 3 times. "This place doesn't feel dead," Ben said almost to himself. "It feels like it's been waiting." Jack didn't respond, because deep down he felt it too. Later that night, after Ben had fallen asleep in the loft, Jack sat alone downstairs. The journal lay open in front of him, lit by a battery lantern. One line stood out, scribbled in a different ink than the rest, like it had been added later. "If you found this, then maybe you're ready." Jack read it twice. Then he looked at the fireplace, at the space behind the wall, at the boards under his feet. He had a feeling this wasn't the only secret this place held. The rain had passed, but the ground still held the memory of it, soft, damp, and smelling of earth and pine. Jack Turner stepped out of the cabin with the old journal tucked under his arm, his boots sinking slightly into the mud with each step. The morning light filtered through the trees in shards, and everything was unnervingly still, like the woods were holding their breath. Inside the cabin, Ben sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through the pages they hadn't yet read. He paused, eyes narrowing at something jammed in the spine of the book. "Dad." Jack stopped on the porch, head tilting back. "Yeah, there's a map in here." That pulled Jack back inside fast. He crouched beside Ben and gently slid the brittle parchment free. It was folded several times and had yellowed along the creases. Jack unfolded it carefully and laid it out on the floor. The lines were hand-drawn, sketched in black ink, with a practiced hand. The cabin sat dead center, labeled with small, neat letters, Granger House. Around it, trees and natural features were marked: the creek, the slope, and further out, several X marks scattered around the property. At the bottom, in faded pencil, someone had written, "Only the compass knows the truth." Jack turned the map sideways, scanning the rest of the symbols. There were circles around 3 of the X's, and near the lower edge of the page, a set of coordinates with initials WG. Ben leaned in. "That's Walter's writing," or Aishonkax nodded. "Sure looks like it." He spotted something else scribbled in the margin, a simple drawing of a brass compass surrounded by arrows pointing outward, like it was meant to guide something, or someone. "We need to find that compass," Jack muttered. Ben grinned. "Maybe there's treasure." Jack chuckled dryly. Knowing Granger, probably blueprints and old wires. Still, something about the way the map was drawn. The deliberate markings, the way the symbols weren't just random, but layered, like someone had encoded meaning into the land itself. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a trail. Later that day, Tucker arrived with a cooler of sandwiches and a coil of fresh rope. Jack handed him the map. Tucker raised an eyebrow. "We doing this now?" "We need answers," Jack said. "And that starts with the spring." The 3 of them headed down the slope, following the creek that curved like a silver ribbon through the woods. It wasn't a long hike, maybe 15 minutes, but the air grew cooler as they descended, shaded by evergreens and thick moss. When they reached the spring, Ben ran ahead, kneeling beside the clear, bubbling water. Just beyond the edge, a flat concrete slab jutted from the earth, like a broken tombstone. "That's not natural," Tucker said. Jack nodded. Granger marked this spot. The slab had symbols carved into it, some geometric, others more like mechanical diagrams. Circles, concentric lines, and what looked like notations in Granger's handwriting, etched shallowly along the edge. Ben brushed away leaves. "There's something buried here." Tucker grabbed the shovel he'd brought and started digging beside the slab. Jack joined in while Ben kept sweeping the stone tracing symbols with his fingertips. After 15 minutes of digging, Tucker's shovel hit something solid, metallic. He knelt and used his hands to clear the rest. They unearthed a metal cylinder about the size of a loaf of bread, coated in rust, but unmistakably man-made. It had smooth, machined grooves and no visible screws or welds. Jack wiped mud off the top to reveal an engraving, WG 1984. Ben's eyes lit up. "This is it, isn't it?" Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah. One of them." Tucker looked up. "You think there's more?" Jack unfolded the map again. "That's what the X's mean. This is just the first." Ben stood holding the compass they'd found in the cabin earlier, the one tucked in a tin box beneath a loose floorboard in the loft. It was heavy and not like any compass Jack had ever seen. The needle didn't point north. It oscillated slowly, settling toward the direction of the concrete slab, as if it were drawn to something inside the device. "The compass knows the truth," Ben whispered. Jack exhaled through his nose. "This thing, it's not just a guide. It's a key." He turned the cylinder over in his hands. No buttons, no lights. But the way it was built, seamless, deliberate, it was clear it wasn't a prototype. It was finished. A piece of something bigger. Tucker glanced at the trees. "This is getting weird, man. Government weird." "I know," Jack said, "but we can't stop now." They took the cylinder back to the cabin and cleared a space on the dining table. Jack fetched the journal and flipped through the pages. Several diagrams matched the shape of the device. In one, Granger had labeled it Energy Field Anchor Node 1. "What kind of machine needs anchors?" Tucker asked. Ben answered before Jack could. "One that doesn't stay still." Jack gave his son a look, half impressed, half worried. That night, as they sat on the porch, watching the fireflies pulse between the trees, Tucker asked the question none of them had voiced yet. "You think he was hiding something, like really hiding it, not just from the government, but from everyone?" Jack stared into the trees. They buried it like a secret, but secrets don't stay buried forever. He didn't say anything else, because deep down the answer had already taken root in his chest. As they locked up the cabin for the night, Ben lingered by the map still spread on the floor. His eyes scanned the next X marked further north on the property near the tree line. He didn't know what they'd find, but he was sure of one thing: Granger had left them something. Not just scraps of ideas or dusty machines. A trail, a message, a test. And they'd just passed the first part. Miles away inside the cab of a black SUV parked on a ridge overlooking the valley. Dean Sloan watched through binoculars as the lights inside the cabin flicked off one by one. He lowered the glasses and pulled out his phone. "They found something," he said flatly. A voice crackled through the speaker. "Confirm it." Sloan started the engine. "Oh, I will." The wind shifted late that morning, blowing colder than it had in days. It came down from the hills like a warning. Jack didn't say anything, but he felt it something in the way the trees moved, the way the air seemed to hum at the edges of silence. He was on the roof patching the last few holes with some salvaged shingles when Ben came running out from behind the cabin, his voice excited and confused. "Dad, you gotta see this. The shed's bigger inside than outside." Jack blinked. "What?" Ben waved both arms. "Come on." "It doesn't make sense." Jack climbed down, tossing the hammer into the toolbox. He followed Ben through the tall grass to the weather-beaten shed about 20 yards from the cabin. It was small, barely 10 by 12 feet, warped from years of sun and rain. But Jack had always thought it odd. It looked like an afterthought sitting crooked on a concrete pad. Ben opened the creaky door and stepped inside. Jack followed, ducking under the low beam. "Okay," Ben said, pointing. "See that wall?" The interior was dim lit only by what sunlight spilled through the cracks in the boards. Jack looked around. There were dusty shelves, a rusted workbench, a few old crates. But when he walked to the back, he stopped. The measurements were off. Way off. From the outside, the shed barely spanned 10 feet. But inside, Jack could pace off almost 13 across. He measured it twice, then looked at Ben. "This wall's fake," he said. Ben grinned. "I knew it." They both stepped closer. Jack ran his fingers along the back wall, smooth plywood, but something was off. He knocked. The echo was hollow. He slid his hand downward, brushing away dust and cobwebs until his fingers caught on a hairline seam in the wood. Jack leaned in, pressing along the edge. Click. A small section of the wall popped inward with a sigh. A hidden door. Jack and Ben exchanged a look. Jack pushed it open. Behind it, stairs led downward, swallowed in darkness. "Get the flashlight," Jack said. Ben ran to the cabin and returned with the heavy-duty beam light. Jack clicked it on, and together they descended the narrow steps, the wood groaning under their weight. Dust swirled in the beam like smoke. The air grew cooler, still dry, and somehow electric. At the bottom of the stairs, the narrow hallway opened into a cavernous room carved directly into the hillside. They stopped dead in their tracks. It looked like something out of a science fiction movie. Machines lined the stone walls, some humming faintly, others still. Workbenches stood in rows covered in tools, wires, and notes. On the far side, a massive circular platform was embedded in the floor, surrounded by tall, metallic pillars with strange rings of copper and glass. Overhead pipes and cabling wove like veins across the ceiling. Jack stepped forward slowly. Ben just whispered, "Whoa." What kind of man builds a lab behind a fake wall and leaves the lights on because the lights were on? Faint, fuzzy, but steady. Jack approached one of the desks and picked up a notebook. It was newer than the others. The paper still crisp, ink bold. September 5, 2024. Tests continue. Miniaturization successful. Device 3 held 12 kilobata, sustained over 6 hours. Jack and Ben, if you're reading this, I was right about you. Keep going. WG. Jack swallowed hard. He was just here. Ben moved toward one of the humming machines. It was roughly the size of a refrigerator with a glass chamber in the center and wires looping into a console beside it. Lights blinked in slow sequence. "Dad." "What is all this?" Jack stared. "Energy systems. Granger was building, I don't even know. Power generators. Maybe more." He crossed the lab and examined another table. On it were blueprints, massive sheets pinned down with metal clamps. One diagram showed a machine labeled Harmonic Resonance Converter Model V3.9 with a warning handle with grounded gloves. Field distortion possible. Ben touched the edge of the blueprint. This could power a whole city, couldn't it? Jack didn't answer, because he didn't know what scared him more, that it could, or that someone else already knew. Tucker arrived later that afternoon, boots muddy and shirt soaked in sweat. Jack led him straight to the lab without saying a word. At the bottom of the stairs, Tucker froze. "Jesus." "Yeah," Jack said quietly. Tucker walked around like he was trying to breathe underwater. "This ain't some off-grid tinker shop, man. This is military grade, Cold War shit. You know how dangerous this could be?" Jack nodded. "I know. But Walter left it for us. For Ben." Tucker looked at the boy who was sketching one of the machines in his notebook, eyes filled with wonder and calculation. "You trust that I trust him," Jack said, "and I trust that we're in the middle of something we don't fully understand yet." Tucker sighed. "This is above all our pay grades." Jack looked at the newest journal again, rereading the last line. "Keep going." He couldn't stop now. Whatever this was, whatever Walter had built it, wasn't meant to stay buried. That night, as Ben fell asleep on the loft floor above the now clean cabin, Jack sat on the porch, staring out into the dark. The forest was alive with crickets and wind. He thought of the machines, the field converters, the power nodes, and the fact that someone had used the compass to find that first buried cylinder. If the lab had stayed powered this long, then someone had been maintaining it, watching. waiting. And Walter knew Jack would find it. Not far away from the same ridge as before, Dean Sloan watched the clearing through a spotting scope. He zoomed in on the cabin, on the shed. He didn't need to see inside. He already knew. Sloan pulled out his phone. Team B, move into position. I want full surveillance by dawn, and prepare for insertion. What are we looking for, sir? Sloan narrowed his eyes. Technology no one was ever supposed to find. Jack stood alone in the lab, the hum of dormant machines surrounding him like a low heartbeat. He traced his fingers along the edge of the workbench, where Walter Granger's most recent notebook still lay open. The last entry burned in his mind. It wasn't just the science, it was the trust. Walter had known they'd come. He'd prepared for it. But why a glint of copper caught Jack's eye near the corner of the room? A small drawer hidden in the side of a cabinet slightly ajar. He pulled it open carefully. Inside was a single envelope. It was thick, sealed with red wax pressed into a stamp, bearing the initials WWG, in neat, clean handwriting across the front to Jack and Ben Turner. If you've come this far, meet me. Jack turned it over in his hands, pulse climbing. He broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Jack Ben. You found what I left because you were meant to. This place is not just mine anymore. It's yours now. My time is ending, and I need people with the courage to protect what comes next. I have watched you both not in the way that invades, but in the way that hopes. You've proven yourselves more than once already. If you're ready for the truth, meet me at the spring. Tomorrow, at sunset. Come alone. Bring the compass. WG. Jack read it 3 times. The language was calm, measured, trusting, like Walter had known this would happen and had left nothing to chance. But Jack's gut told him there was more at play. He folded the letter, slid it into his jacket pocket, and climbed the stairs back into daylight. Ben was sitting on the porch with his sketchbook drawing one of the machines from memory. He looked up as Jack stepped out. What did you find? Jack sat beside him silent for a beat. You don't find places like this, unless they want to be found. Ben tilted his head. That sounds like something Granger would say. Jack smiled faintly. It was. He handed the letter to Ben. The boy read it quietly, lips moving slightly as he took in each word. Do we go? He asked. Jack looked out at the trees swaying gently in the wind. We go. The next day crawled like molasses. Jack couldn't focus. Every noise in the woods sounded like footsteps. Every time the wind brushed the side of the cabin, he turned his head. They spent the morning cleaning tools in the lab and organizing blueprints. Jack was trying to stay busy, Ben could tell. But beneath the surface, tension buzzed like a live wire. At lunch, Tucker pulled up in his truck, eyes squinting against the sun. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Jack nodded toward the woods. I think I'm about to. He handed Tucker the letter. Tucker read it, then looked up slowly. He's alive, Jack nodded. And he wants to meet. Tucker let out a low whistle. You think it's real could be a trap. Could be, Jack said. But if it is, I need to know. I can't protect Ben from something I don't understand. Tucker hesitated, then clapped him on the shoulder. Then don't go alone. Jack shook his head. He asked us to. Just Ben and me. Tucker narrowed his eyes. You got that look, Jack. What look? The one that says you're about to do something crazy and brave at the same time. Jack didn't deny it. They left just before sunset. Jack wore his old army jacket, the envelope tucked inside. Ben carried the brass compass, its strange needle already swinging slightly west toward the spring. Neither of them spoke much on the walk. The forest was golden with dying light casting long shadows over the trail. The air smelled of wet bark and pine needles. As they approached the spring, Jack noticed something strange. The birds had gone quiet. The clearing was exactly as it had been before the flat stone marker, the gentle bubbling of water. But there was a tension in the air, like everything around them was waiting. Ben gripped his father's hand. A voice came from the trees. "You came." Jack turned instantly, alert hand hovering near his belt instinctively. A figure stepped from the shadows. Tall, thin, wearing an old field jacket, gray hair combed back, eyes sharp and clear like they saw through everything. Walter Granger. He looked older than Jack had imagined, but stronger too, like someone who'd lived outside the system long enough to become his own. "Thank you, Walter," said voice low and calm. "I had to be sure." Jack said nothing. He didn't trust easily, but something in Walter's eyes, steady, unflinching, calmed him. "You've seen the lab," Walter continued. "Read the notes. You know what's down there." Jack nodded. "Pieces, but not the full picture." Walter stepped closer. "Then let me show you." He knelt by the stone, placed his hand on a specific groove and pressed. A faint click echoed beneath their feet. A square section of the ground opened, revealing a small box. Inside it was a handheld device, sleek metallic, with a humming core. Walter held it up. "This," he said, "can power your entire cabin for 20 years. No gas, no grid, no waste." Jack stared at it. "It's real," Ben whispered. Walter smiled. "Very real. And it's only one of many." Jack shook his head slowly. "Why us?" Walter stood again, folding his hands behind his back. "Because most people would have pawned that compass. Most people would have ignored the rot and walked away from the cabin. You didn't." He turned to Ben. "And you saw the house before it was ever fixed. That's the kind of vision that changes the world." Ben beamed. Walter's face turned grave. "But you need to understand, this isn't just about power. It's about danger. There are people out there who would bury this in concrete if they could. Or worse, turn it into a weapon." Jack thought about the SUV tracks he'd found near the ridge, the static on the radio, the unease that had crept in over the past 2 days. "They already know," he said. Walter nodded once. "I've kept them at bay for years, but now that you're involved, they'll come back. That's why I had to meet you, to pass it on officially." "Pass what on?" Jack asked. Walter reached into his coat and pulled out a legal folder sealed and signed. "Everything. The lab, the tech, the patents, the land, and a fund I've kept hidden, $5 million set aside for development and protection." Jack went cold. "You're serious?" Walter didn't blink. "I'm done running. But this legacy, it needs guardians. Builders, not profiteers." Jack looked at Ben, who stared at the small generator in awe. "We'll do it," the boy said. Walter studied them both. "Good." He handed Jack the device, the folder, and one last envelope. "Take these to the attorney in Knoxville. He's expecting you. After that, the work begins." Jack looked down at the machine in his hand. Walter stepped back toward the trees. "I won't be far, but from here on out, it's your story." He disappeared into the forest like smoke. As they walked back through the darkening woods, Ben clutched the compass, eyes wide. "Dad," he whispered, "what if we really can change everything?" Jack didn't answer right away. He just tightened his grip on the generator. because he felt it too. Something had shifted, and it wasn't going back. By the time they reached the cabin, night had fallen completely, and the mountains were black silhouettes against a moonless sky. Jack parked the truck just beyond the tree line, killing the headlights before they hit the clearing. He didn't know why, instinct maybe. A tightening in his gut had started during the walk back from the spring and hadn't let go since. Ben clutched the small generator Walter had given them like it was a sacred artifact. Jack had wrapped it in an old army blanket and tucked it into a duffel bag, but the warmth still radiated through the canvas. It wasn't hot, not exactly. It just felt alive, like it knew it wasn't supposed to exist in the world the way it was now. As they stepped onto the porch, Jack froze. Something was off. The front door, which he had triple-checked before leaving, was slightly ajar. Jack dropped the duffel and held an arm in front of Ben. "Stay behind me." Ben didn't argue. Jack reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out the small pistol he hadn't carried since Sarah's illness, tucked away in a toolbox until last week. He nudged the door open with the barrel heart pounding. Inside the cabin was dark but not empty. Drawers were open, tools scattered, a box of blueprints dumped on the floor. Someone had been here. Recently. Ben whispered, "Was it him?" Jack shook his head. No. Walter wouldn't tear the place apart. This was a search. He moved through the rooms quickly, checking corners, closets, the loft. No sign of whoever had done it. They were gone. But they'd been looking for something. Jack turned back to Ben. "Grab your bag. We're sleeping in the lab tonight." They descended into the hidden basement as quietly as possible. Jack bolted the steel security door at the top of the stairwell, something he hadn't bothered with before. He didn't sleep that night. At sunrise, Tucker's truck bounced into the clearing. Jack met him outside before he could even get out. "We had visitors," Jack said. Tucker's eyes narrowed. "Government don't know. Could be private. Could be worse." He walked Tucker through the ransacked cabin, then down into the lab where Ben had set up a crude workbench using the blueprints. Tucker let out a low whistle when he saw the generator. "That it?" Jack nodded. "One of them." Tucker circled it slowly. "And it works." Jack looked at the nearby monitor Walter had left. It was hooked up to the device, showing a steady readout, 18.3 kilowatt. Stable. No drop in hours. No cords. No fuel, just this. Tucker exhaled. "Jesus." Ben looked up from his sketching. "We can use it. For everything." Jack knelt beside him. "Not yet." "But why?" "We can show people it works because this tech doesn't belong in the wrong hands. And right now, I don't know whose hands are reaching for it." Ben went quiet. Tucker frowned. "So what's the plan?" Jack glanced at the camera feed. Walter had installed 4 motion-activated trail cams around the property. One of them had caught something last night. He hit playback. A black SUV, tinted windows, parked just beyond the trees around 2:17 a.m. A figure stepped out, looked toward the cabin, then back at the vehicle. He didn't approach, but he was watching. The government wanted control. "I chose silence. Now I choose you." Walter's words rang in Jack's mind again. Now the silence was over. Dean Sloan sat in the back seat of the SUV, arms folded, eyes locked on the cabin's feed via a drone hovering half a mile away. His voice was steady as he spoke into the comm. "They found the generator." On the other end, the response was sharp. "Confirm," Sloan nodded. "I've got heat signatures. Constant. Same output signature as Granger's old work. Move in not yet. Let them get comfortable. Make mistakes. We'll take the tech and the narrative. He leaned back. No arrests. No headlines. This stays in the shadows. That afternoon, Jack sat with the envelope Walter had given him, the legal transfer papers, land deed, patent registration drafts, and access codes for a fund. $5 million. Tied to a bank in Chicago under a foundation name Jack didn't recognize. But the paperwork was solid. Walter had covered every base. There were instructions for the lawyer in Knoxville. Dates, witnesses, a notary already assigned. Jack held it all in his hands and still couldn't believe it. Ben watched him from across the table. You trust him, don't you? Jack nodded slowly. I do. Ben's face softened. Then we have to protect it. All of it. Jack stood, determination rising in his chest. Then we do this right. They drove to Knoxville the next morning. The lawyer's office was tucked between a bookstore and a bank on Gay Street. Inside, the air smelled of paper and lemon-scented polish. The receptionist greeted them like she'd been waiting for years. Mr. Turner. Right this way. The attorney, an older man with a kind face and sharp eyes, rose when they entered. You've made it, he said. Walter said you would. Jack placed the folder on the table. I'm ready. The man smiled. Then let's get to work. For the next 2 hours, they went through everything. Deed transfers, trust formation, NDA clauses, asset protection. The lawyer handed Jack a binder at the end. You're officially the legal successor to Granger Technologies and its assets, he said. Jack let that settle. It didn't feel real, until he stepped outside and saw the world look the same. Cars, street signs, people on their phones. But everything had changed. Back at the cabin, Ben walked out to the spring with the compass in his hand. He knelt beside the concrete slab where they'd first met Walter. His fingers traced the symbol etched there. He didn't know why, but something tugged at him. A hum beneath the surface. Not the generator. Not the compass. Something deeper. Something older. He didn't tell Jack. Not yet. That night after dinner, Jack stepped out onto the porch. The stars were clearer than they'd ever been. No streetlights. No noise. Just the forest breathing around them. He held the generator in one hand, still humming faintly. This was real. His. And it needed protecting. For Ben. For the world. Half a mile away, Dean Sloan lowered the night vision binoculars, a slow grin creeping across his face. They signed the transfer, he muttered. It's official now. He keyed the radio. Phase 2. Get ready. The wind shifted again that morning, sharper, colder. Jack didn't notice it at first, not until he stepped out of the cabin with his coffee and felt the back of his neck prickle. The kind of feeling you got when someone was watching. Not just eyes on you, but eyes meant to see you. Trained eyes. He scanned the woods automatically. No movement. No sound beyond the birds and the soft hum of the generator still running below. Inside, Ben was at the workbench again, tinkering with a voltage monitor hooked up to the generator. Jack leaned against the doorway, watching his son flip wires and log numbers like a seasoned engineer. You've got a good head for this, Jack said. Ben looked up, grinning. I think the converter's pulling more than it did yesterday. Either it's adjusting to the cabin load or it's learning. Jack raised an eyebrow. Machines don't learn. Ben shrugged. This one doesn't feel like a machine. Jack didn't respond. Not because he disagreed, but because he felt it too. The generator wasn't just on, it was awake in some small, unsettling way. They worked most of the morning in the lab fine-tuning the secondary circuits and testing energy output levels. Jack had started taking notes in one of Walter's empty journals, his own handwriting joining the legacy that had begun decades ago. It felt good, purposeful, until the signal interference started. Ben noticed it first. The compass on the table began vibrating slightly, nothing visible but just enough that when he placed his finger on it, it buzzed under his touch. Then came the static in the walkie-talkies. Tucker had left them as a backup comm system. They'd been quiet all week. Now they crackled to life with bursts of garbled noise. Could be interference from the generator, Ben offered. Jack shook his head. It's too clean. That's not random feedback. That's tracking. They went topside, swept the perimeter. Nothing out of place. But Jack noticed a fresh divot in the dirt near the tree line. He crouched, brushed back some leaves, and found it. A black plastic casing no bigger than a deck of cards, half buried. Antenna. Flash memory. GPS logo etched on the side. A tracker. Jack stood, heart hammering. They weren't being watched. They were being hunted. This isn't just science, Jack. This is power. And power makes enemies. Walter's warning echoed in his mind like thunder. By afternoon, the sky had dimmed, clouds crawling in low. Jack and Ben packed the generator into a lead-lined crate Walter had left in the lab emergency protocol, handwritten on the lid, if compromised, isolate. Tucker arrived just before dusk. Jack met him halfway up the gravel path, holding up the tracker. Tucker's jaw clenched. We're east tree line. Buried shallow. Signals active. Tucker cursed under his breath. They're here. Jack nodded. And they're close. Inside the cabin, Ben was still calm, focused. He'd drawn out a complete system diagram from memory, labeling each node, each pathway, each function of the converter. He didn't seem afraid. Maybe he didn't know enough to be, or maybe he just believed more than Jack ever could. That night, Jack double-locked the doors and slept with the pistol beside his mattress. Sometime around 2 a.m., the lights flickered, not in the cabin, in the lab. A low hum like something spinning up. Jack bolted upright. He rushed downstairs to find the generator glowing faintly through the crate, through the lead. Ben was already there, eyes wide. It's reacting. To what I don't know. They watched as the humming peaked, then slowly faded. The readout on the monitor leveled out again. The energy spike had been brief but measurable. Could be a scan, Ben whispered. Some kind of remote probe. Jack's stomach turned. We're running out of time. The next day brought the message. It arrived in a plain white envelope taped to the front door. No one saw who left it. No vehicle tracks. No footprints. Inside, a single sentence printed in bold font. You don't own what you've found. You're just borrowing it. Return it. While you still can. No signature. No logo. Just threat, pure and simple. Jack showed Tucker, who read it twice before crumpling it in his fist. We go public, Tucker said. Today. Jack hesitated. We don't know who we're up against yet. We know enough. They're in our backyard, man. They've already made it personal. Ben spoke from the hallway. What if we beat them to it? Jack turned. How Ben's eyes were glowing with that same fire Walter must have seen. We show the town. Make it real. Make it visible. If everyone sees it, no one can erase it. Tucker nodded slowly. County fairs this weekend. You show that thing in public on neutral ground, it's game over. Jack considered it. A demo, in front of hundreds, powering an entire booth with a generator the size of a lunchbox. It was risky, but it was the only shot they had left. Later that evening, Jack walked the perimeter, again flashlight in hand. No movement, no signs of recent disturbance. But the woods no longer felt like home. They felt like a trap waiting to spring. He returned to the cabin to find Ben asleep on the couch, sketchbook open on his chest. Jack picked it up gently and flipped to the last page. It was a new drawing. The generator sitting on a stage, lights strung above, people gathered around, and in the middle of it all, Ben smiling, pointing. Jack closed the notebook and exhaled. "Then we make it real," he whispered. A few miles away, in a low-lit trailer brimming with monitors, Dean Sloan stared at a real-time satellite map of the Turner property. He zoomed in. The power readings had spiked again. He tapped a keyboard overlaying heat signatures. Still no hard visuals, but he didn't need them. He'd read Walter Granger's tech 20 years ago. He knew the signs. He leaned forward, speaking into his comm. "They're planning something." "What do you want to do?" a voice replied. Sloan smiled faintly. "We let them show their hand. And when they do, we take the whole damn table." The town of Elkmont was already stirring when Jack's truck rolled down Main Street just after sunrise. Flags were strung between street lamps, booths were being set up outside the rec center, and the smell of funnel cakes and sawdust clung to the morning air. The annual county fair wasn't much, just a few rides. Some food vendors, local crafts, but today it would become the stage for something bigger. In the truck bed, covered by a black tarp and strapped down tight, sat the impossible Walter Granger's prototype harmonic generator. Jack had spent all night modifying it to power the stage they'd reserved through a community science grant. The booth was listed under the name Turner Energy Solutions. No one would know what it was until the moment they flipped the switch. Ben sat in the passenger seat, staring at the people outside as they passed by. He was quiet, unusually so, but Jack could tell his mind was racing. "You okay?" Jack asked. Ben nodded, then added, "They're gonna try to stop us, aren't they?" "Probably." Ben took a breath. "Then we better make it count. When you hold light in your hands, shadows come looking." Jack nodded grimly. "We make it count." They arrived at the far end of the fairgrounds and began setting up. Their booth was simple, a wooden platform, a few posters showing diagrams of sustainable rural energy systems, and an enclosed demo space wired to the hidden generator. Everything looked ordinary, even boring. That was the point. The local electrician came by with a clipboard and a squint. "You sure you don't need a hookup to the grid?" Jack smiled. "We brought our own juice." The man shrugged. "Long as you don't blow out the lights." Ben suppressed a grin as the man walked off. By noon, the fair was in full swing. Kids ran around with ice cream, a bluegrass band played near the courthouse steps, and the smell of grilled corn and sausages filled the air. No one noticed the quiet buzz of something else humming behind Jack's booth, clean, stable, and unlike anything that had ever powered this town before. Ben handed out flyers. Most people took them politely and moved on. Some asked about off-grid energy. One or two raised eyebrows at the claim of no external power required. Then came the moment. At 2 p.m., Jack stood in front of a small gathering crowd. He held a mic wired directly to the generator. "No wires, no fuel, no batteries," he said. "Everything you see here, light, sound, even that cooling fan is running off one machine, about the size of a car battery." He nodded to Ben. Ben flipped the master switch. The booth lit up bright, clean, perfect. The fans spun to life. The screen behind them lit up with a looping animation of how the converter worked. Even the mic's audio sharpened as feedback dropped to zero. The crowd went quiet. Then someone clapped. Then more. Within minutes, the small crowd became a larger one. People leaned in, asked questions. A local news reporter showed up, camera in hand. Jack gave a carefully worded statement about experimental breakthroughs in rural power systems. He avoided the word free. He avoided the word Granger. But the effect was the same. People saw. And that meant it couldn't be unseen. Half a block away, Dean Sloan stood beneath the shade of a food tent, chewing a toothpick. Sunglasses hiding his eyes. He wore a denim jacket and a ball cap, nothing suspicious, but his earpiece was live. "They're doing it," he muttered. A voice crackled through. "You want us to shut it down?" Sloan stared at the glowing booth at the boy with the compass around his neck, the man beside him guarding something that didn't belong in a county fair. "No," he said. "We let them finish. And then we frame it." Back at the booth, Jack noticed something strange. His phone lost signal. Not just low bars, no service. Ben checked his too. Same result. Then the screen on the display flickered for half a second, just a blink, then back to normal. Jack stepped behind the booth, opened the side panel, and checked the generator readout. Anomalies. Spike detected. Someone was scanning them. Hard. Dad Ben said, eyes wide, "Look." A black van had pulled up across the street. 2 men stepped out, business casual, sunglasses, earpieces. They weren't local. They didn't belong. Jack clenched his jaw. They're moving. Tucker, watching from a nearby bench, stood and made his way casually over. "You want to bail?" he asked. Jack looked at Ben, then at the growing crowd of fairgoers now filming the booth with their phones. "No. We finished this." He turned up the mic. "I know some of this might sound too good to be true," he said, voice steady, "but this isn't a trick. It's real, and it's only the beginning. Imagine a world where no one has to choose between heat and groceries, where hospitals don't go dark during storms, where the lights never go out unless you want them to." Ben stood beside him, holding up the compass. A child pointed from the front row. "It looks like something from space." Laughter, then applause. More cameras, more eyes. It was done. They packed up slowly. By sundown, most of the fair was winding down. Jack and Ben drove home in silence, adrenaline and relief crashing into each other like waves. As they reached the gravel road to the cabin, Jack finally spoke. "They'll make their move soon." Ben nodded. "We'll be ready." Jack didn't answer, because he wasn't sure that was true. That night, Jack set up motion sensors along the property edge, connecting them to an old laptop using Walter's original surveillance protocols. Tucker stayed behind shotgun propped beside the front door. Ben sat at the dining table drawing the booth from memory, only this time it wasn't just one. He'd drawn 10, then 100, then a world covered in them. Miles away, Dean Sloan stood before a row of monitors inside a mobile command trailer. He pressed a button. "Execute retrieval. No visible force. Get in, get the tech, and wipe everything." A voice responded. "They have backup, I don't care," Sloan said coldly. "Burn the backup if you have to." He stared at the still image of Jack and Ben standing beneath the glowing lights, hands on what should have never left the dark. The first drone came just before midnight. It buzzed low over the treetops, no louder than a swarm of insects, but enough to set off the motion sensors Jack had rigged along the east perimeter. He sat bolt upright on the couch, pistol already in hand. Beside him, Tucker looked up from his chair, shotgun across his lap. They didn't speak. Jack moved to the window and flicked the latch on the panel that covered the exterior lights. He had modified the wiring earlier that evening enough to cut all glow without killing the sensors. In the quiet, the sound of the drone was sharper than thunder. Ben emerged from the loft, barefoot sleep still clinging to his face. "Is it starting?" he asked. Jack nodded once. "Stay close." They slipped downstairs into the lab where the generator hummed quietly inside its protective casing. Jack flicked a switch, and the screen lit up power readings, steady output, clean. But there was a new signal on the system pulsing irregularly. Unauthorized access attempts. "They're probing the signal," Jack muttered, "trying to overload it or trace the frequency." "Can they?" Ben asked. "If we stay connected too long, maybe. You can't silence a secret once it starts to shine." And this one was shining bright. Jack killed the outbound signal, entirely switching the converter to an internal loop. It was no longer broadcasting, but it was still live. The house went quiet again. Then the power cut. Not just the lights, everything. Jack cursed and ran upstairs. He checked the breakers intact. Backup battery dead. Generator still active but jammed. Tucker checked his watch, tapping the screen. Signal blockers. Jack grabbed a portable radio from the kitchen drawer and switched to a backup frequency. Nothing. "They're jamming all lines," he said. "GPS comms cell gone." He opened the closet by the front door and pulled out a metal briefcase Walter had labeled fail-safe beacon. He popped the latches. Inside a compact transmitter with a single button, broadcast now. Once activated, it would send a burst signal containing everything: designs, test results, schematics, to multiple encrypted cloud repositories around the world. Walter's ultimate insurance policy. "Worst-case scenario," Jack muttered. Ben stepped forward. "You thinking we're there?" Jack looked out the window. 2 more drones zipped through the trees, lights blinking faint red. "I'm thinking we're close." Outside, hidden in the woods, Dean Sloan gave the signal. 2 teams moved silently toward the cabin, 6 men total, dressed in gray tactical gear, with no insignia. Non-lethal weapons, scramblers, thermal optics. Each had one job: retrieve the generator. Nothing more. "Minimize contact," Sloan whispered into the comm. "Get in. Get out." But as the teams crept closer, one of the agents froze. Something blinked in the tree beside him. A small light. Then a flash. Boom! The concussion mine Jack had buried earlier sent shockwaves through the trees, flattening the grass and tossing the agents like dolls. No one was killed, but they wouldn't be walking straight for a while. Inside the cabin, Jack grinned as the sensors lit up. "Told you they'd come through the trees," Tucker muttered. Ben pointed at the monitor. "They're regrouping." Coming in from the back, Jack grabbed the fail-safe case and stuffed it into his backpack. "We're not letting them get this." The next 20 minutes were chaos. 3 agents breached the back shed thinking it led into the cabin. Instead, they found a booby-trapped wall of paint cans and flashbangs. Another tried the side window only to be met with a blast of pressurized ammonia from the custom rig Jack had wired to the latch. But still, they kept coming. Inside, Jack handed Ben a second backpack lighter with essential blueprints, the compass, and the modified microcore from the converter. "If they get in," Jack said, "you take the woods. Head to the spring. Stay low. Don't stop." Ben stared at him. "What about you?" Jack looked him in the eye. "I'll be right behind you. But if I'm not, you run anyway." Tucker checked the remaining ammo. "We've got maybe 10 minutes left." Ben took the bag. His jaw was tight, eyes fierce. "I won't let them win," he said. Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. I know. Then without warning, everything stopped. The buzzing, the signals, even the generator's hum. Silence. Then a voice amplified through a directional speaker somewhere in the woods. Jack Turner. You're in possession of unauthorized government property. You have 60 seconds to surrender the device. Ben whispered, "It's happening." Jack stood calm now, like the eye of a storm had just passed over them. He walked to the porch and stepped into the dark. "Come and get it," he said aloud, not to the voice but to the woods themselves, and then light. Every floodlight Jack had rigged around the property activated at once, powered by the last reserves from the backup loop. A circle of brilliant white cut through the trees, blinding the agents outside. In that moment, Jack activated the failsafe. A compressed pulse of data shot upward, silent, invisible, unstoppable. It hit 3 satellites, bounced to 31 servers. The entire network lit up like a neural flare. The genie was out. There was no putting it back. Sloan saw the upload too late. "Shut it down," he barked. But the techs shook their heads. "It's already gone. Full spread. Global." Sloan slammed his fist on the table. They hadn't just lost the tech. They'd lost the narrative. Back at the cabin, Jack turned to Ben. "It's done." Ben looked stunned. "Now what? We protect what's left." They knew the attack wouldn't continue, not now, not when exposure was certain. But that didn't mean they were safe. It meant the game had changed. They weren't hiding something anymore. They were guarding it. By sunrise, the agents had vanished. No bodies, no prints, like shadows fading at dawn. Tucker stood beside Jack at the porch rail, both men hollow-eyed but upright. "We won, right?" Tucker asked. Jack looked out over the woods. "We survived," he said. "The world's next." In a quiet house somewhere in Virginia, a general stared at a TV showing early news coverage from the fair, the mysterious energy booth that powered itself, the child who smiled, the man who wouldn't answer questions. "Find them," the general said. "Sir, we already," I said, "find them." The video went viral in less than 12 hours. It started with a teenager's TikTok clip, Ben flipping the switch at the fair, the lights humming on the screen, glowing to life with no cables, no noise, no explanation. The post was captioned, "This kid just powered a booth with nothing. Someone tell me this is fake." By morning, it had 20 million views. By noon, it was on CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera. And by nightfall, the world was knocking on Jack Turner's door. Not literally, no one knew exactly where he was. Not yet. But emails, voicemails, and encrypted messages poured into the foundation address Walter had set up years ago. Scientists, investors, politicians, conspiracy theorists. Some offered money. Some offered asylum. Some just wanted to talk. Jack didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. He and Ben had relocated to a small farmhouse 2 counties over one Walter had purchased under a different name long ago. They'd brought the generator and the microcore safely stored beneath the barn in a secondary vault. Tucker stayed behind at the cabin to monitor any activity, armed and on alert. The world was burning with questions, but Jack wasn't ready to answer. Not until he knew who was truly listening. Ben sat in the upstairs room surrounded by news clips printed out and pinned to the walls. He'd started mapping the responses, red pins for hostile governments, green for scientific institutions, yellow for private tech companies. "There's a pattern," he said one morning, tapping the map. "The ones who want to help, they're the ones who don't need it. Sweden, New Zealand, Canada. Stable places. The ones who want to own it. They're already on the edge." Jack studied the chart. "And the U.S., Ben didn't answer. Jack already knew. The truth doesn't belong to anyone, but everyone will try to claim it. Later that day, a letter arrived. Hand-delivered. No postmark, no name. Just a wax seal pressed into the back of the envelope, an old scientific sigil Walter once used. The same one etched into the slab by the spring. Jack opened it carefully. Inside a note handwritten in sharp, slanted cursive. "You've done what I never could. Now finish what I started. When the time comes, don't protect the invention. Protect the idea. WG." Jack read it twice. Ben read it once and asked, "You think he's still alive?" Jack shook his head. "No, but his reach is." By that weekend, 3 major networks requested exclusive interviews. One offered $5 million. Another offered complete anonymity and global syndication under a controlled narrative. The third, they offered silence, a bribe to walk away, disappear, and never speak of it again. Jack stared at the offers on the table. Ben sat across from him, quiet. "What if we say no to all of them?" Ben finally asked. Jack raised an eyebrow. "You want to bury it again?" Ben shook his head. "No, I want to build it. Show people how. Teach them." Jack leaned back in his chair. "You're thinking of going open source?" Ben nodded. "It's the only way no one can steal it." It was risky. Once the schematics were out there, they'd lose control entirely. Anyone could use it, improve it, abuse it. But it also meant it would never be silenced again. 2 days later, they drove to Nashville under cover of darkness and met with Dr. Helena Ruiz, a physicist who had once collaborated with Walter during his years in hiding. She was older now, sharp-eyed, and just cynical enough to survive academia. "I've seen the footage," she said after testing the microcore herself. "This isn't just next gen, it's next epoch. You're sitting on a global shift in civilization." Jack nodded. "We know." Helena looked between them. "So what's your move?" Ben answered before Jack could. "We want to publish everything. Raw. Free. Under Walter's name." Helena leaned back, eyebrows raised. "You're either brilliant or suicidal." Jack cracked a faint smile. "Maybe both." They returned to the farmhouse and set up a secure node connected to a decentralized archive system designed for whistleblowers and dissidents. Over 3 days, they uploaded Walter's blueprints, test data calibration guides, and prototype videos, hundreds of files verified and digitally signed. Then Jack recorded a video of his own. He stood in front of the generator, lit only by its glow. "This is not ours," he said. "This belongs to anyone who chooses to use it for good." Ben stood beside him, holding the compass. Walter's face appeared briefly on screen, an old recording saying, "Only build better." Then the file went live. Within minutes, servers across the globe mirrored it. The link was embedded on scientific forums, mirrored on blockchain, passed through encrypted channels. No one could take it down. The world had it now. In the days that followed, something extraordinary happened. Not panic, not chaos. Hope. Small teams of engineers began recreating the design. A community power project in rural India lit an entire village with a prototype core. A tech collective in Ghana built a microgrid using scavenged parts. Even a group of high school students in Oregon managed to power a greenhouse for the winter. And governments, they scrambled. Some called it a hoax. Others denounced it as cyber terrorism. One country outright banned the download of the files. Within hours, it was trending on every social platform. It was unstoppable. But then came the silence. A different kind of silence. Jack noticed it first. No more threats. No more trackers. No more black vans. Not because the danger was gone, because the next move was being prepared. Something's coming. Jack said, standing in the barn with Tucker that night. Tucker nodded. They're not going to let this stand. Not without a fight. Jack agreed. And that's when the final letter arrived. Same wax seal. Inside was a single phrase: you lit the match. Now run. It wasn't a warning. It was a dare. In the distance, somewhere beyond the hills, a low rumble echoed. Not thunder, not weather. A convoy, not military, but not civilian either. The shadows hadn't disappeared. They'd regrouped, and now they were coming. Ben stood beside Jack, holding the compass. The light inside it pulsed with a steady rhythm. He looked up. "We don't run," he said. Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. "No," he said quietly. "We lead." They came at dawn. Not in the cover of night, like last time, but under full sunlight, an open declaration. 4 unmarked black SUVs, 2 white vans, and a chopper that hovered just far enough out of range to avoid suspicion, but close enough to remind everyone that eyes were always watching. Jack stood on the porch of the farmhouse, his hand wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, but he wasn't drinking. Beside him, Ben adjusted the strap on the backpack slung over his shoulder. Inside it, a portable micro-core compass, flash drives, and a letter from Walter Granger that still smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Tucker walked up from the barn, rifle in hand, but lowered. "They're not here to talk," he said. "No," Jack agreed, "but we are." Ben looked between them, then toward the approaching vehicles. "So this is it?" Jack nodded. "Yeah. This is the last fork in the road." Ben took a breath, steadying himself. "I'm not afraid," he said. Jack looked at him and smiled. "Neither am I. You don't protect the future by hiding the truth, you protect it by sharing it." The first SUV pulled up the driveway and stopped. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. One of them, mid-50s, tall, steel-gray hair, walked toward them alone. He had the air of someone used to being obeyed. Jack recognized him. General Marcus Rollins, NSA liaison, former Energy Crisis Task Force leader. Now head of an unnamed department whose budget didn't appear on any official records. Mr. Turner, Rollins said, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "I thought we might talk." Jack gestured to the rocking chair across from him. "We've got coffee. But I'm not handing over anything." Rollins didn't sit. "It's a matter of national security." "No," Jack said calmly. "It's a matter of human security." Big difference. Behind Rollins, more men were getting out of the vans, technicians no doubt waiting to seize hardware, rip out servers, or take them into custody. Ben stepped forward. "You can't stop it. It's already out there." Rollins didn't look at him. "You misunderstand. We're not trying to stop it. We're trying to manage it." Jack stood now. "Is that what you call it?" he asked. "Managing. Like you managed." Walter Rollins's face didn't change. Granger was reckless. "You've done better. Which is why we're offering you a choice." He handed Jack a small folder. Inside, a contract. Government backing. Funding. Complete security. Distribution through authorized global partners. You take this deal, Rollins said, you get to control how the world sees your work. You stay alive. Your boy stays safe. Jack looked down at the paper. Ben looked up at his father. Jack let the silence stretch. Then he tore the contract in half. Rollins blinked. Jack tossed the pieces to the wind. "I didn't survive this long to sell the truth back to the people who buried it." The standoff didn't escalate. It dissolved. Because once the story broke that federal agents had attempted to seize private technology designed to bring clean energy to millions, the court of public opinion detonated. Protests erupted. Politicians scrambled to disavow involvement, and scientists, real ones, began to replicate Walter's work at a pace no institution could slow. Jack, Ben, and Tucker left the farmhouse the next day, not because they were afraid, but because their job was done. They had lit the fuse. Now the world had to carry the flame. Months passed. Ben enrolled in a public innovation fellowship funded by independent universities. He used a fake last name. No security detail, no spotlight, just blueprints and a quiet room where he could tinker in peace. Jack moved to a small coastal town in Oregon. He bought a modest home with a shed and a view of the water. In the evenings, he taught kids how to repair solar panels and engines. Sometimes he still checked the forums under an alias just to see the latest builds. Tucker disappeared into the hills with a dog and a CB radio. He still called once a month. The world had changed, and it hadn't. But that's how revolutions always begin, not in explosions, but in echoes. One afternoon, Jack received a package. No return address. Inside was a note. You never really owned it. You just kept it alive long enough for the rest of us to see it. Beneath the note, a photo. A village in Sudan lit at night by string lights and a homemade generator. Children laughing. A girl holding up a compass like it was a trophy. Jack stared at the image for a long time. Then he hung it on the wall. A year later, Ben gave a talk at an underground energy summit in Iceland. He didn't reveal who he was. He didn't need to. The audience already knew. He closed with the same phrase Walter had once scribbled in his final notebook, "Build better." And this time it echoed, not just in the room, but in cities, camps, and islands across the planet. Places where the light used to die after sundown. Places that now glowed like stars. Years from now, when historians write about the shift, the moment the world bent in a new direction, they won't point to a government, a war, or even a scientist. They'll point to a father and son, to a broken-down cabin in the Smoky Mountains, to an invention that refused to stay buried, to the choice to share instead of own. Because that was the real power. Not electricity, but hope, shared freely, burning bright, and never again in the dark.